Now, the Buckeye Extra podcast with Rob Aller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of the Buckeye Extra Football Podcast. I'm Bill Rabinowitz, and we are very happy and lucky to have Adam Sparks from the Knoxville Sentinel. Welcome. First of all, thanks for doing this, Adam. Appreciate it. It's a news.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, actually, News Sentinel. I'm sorry.
Close enough.
I'm sorry. We're the Columbus Dispatch, but so many times people say, "Oh, it's like the Columbus Post Dispatch" because it's a St. Louis Post Dispatch, right? So I'm sorry.
They all run together. KnoxNews.com, Knoxville News-Sentinel. We answer to all of them. It's good to be on. I know this is a little more normal for Ohio State to have a playoff game at this point in the year, but Tennessee is usually in a Florida Bowl right now, not a playoff. So it's similar but a little different this postseason.
Yeah, what is the level of excitement for this game in Knoxville?
Really, really high. I mean, you've seen sort of the narrative of the ticket takeover for however real that is or not. I don't know. But it's sort of a glimpse at how badly Tennessee fans have wanted this game. To get to the game, Tennessee fans really wanted a home game. Obviously, that didn't happen. But it's something that Tennessee fans have waited a long time for. They won the national title in '98, and then went through sort of the wilderness of college football for about 10 or 15 years, and got really good 2 years ago under Josh Heupel. And then this year the hope was to get to the 12-team playoff because the field was expanding, and they got there. And as much as the team is not going to say it, I think there is a sense that they're sort of playing loose, sort of with house money at this point, because if Tennessee were to beat Ohio State, it's sort of gravy. If they lose to Ohio State, there'll be frustrations for a few days, but I don't think there'll be any riots or anything, because the goal was to get to the playoff. Winning, I think, is just sort of a bonus.
Little different for Ohio State. Little different. This is
yeah.
This is like, okay, we didn't beat Michigan. We didn't didn't win a Big Ten championship. This is Ohio State speaking, and we better win this one. I mean, that's the feeling that among the Buckeyes, at least.
And I shouldn't even maybe I shouldn't downplay it as much, because the goal is to get farther. There's sort of a subtext there to Tennessee that their roster is built to make a run this year. So they're one of the oldest teams in the country in terms of offensive, defensive line. A lot of 6-year seniors, a lot of COVID seniors, and they have their 5-star quarterback who's now a second-year guy. So I will say the roster is built to make a run this year. But I think the realistic fans look at it and say, you're in now, just see if you can win. But the goal was to get in.
Okay. Let me back up a little bit. Tell me about your experience. How long have you covered the team? Are you a native Tennessean?
You can tell by my accent.
I know you're a native somewhere.
I'm a native Tennessean. I grew up in West Tennessee, and then I covered Middle Tennessee State, FBS program in Murfreesboro.
The home of one Kelly Holcomb.
That's right.
With the Cleveland Browns.
That's right. Kelly Holcomb is a buddy. I've spent a lot of time with Kelly Holcomb.
Kelly, I said hello.
I'll do it.
He won't remember me, but
I bet he will. He remembers anybody that ever covered it.
I like covering Kelly. He was a good guy.
Yeah, he is. So yes, I covered Middle Tennessee for a number of years. That was my alma mater. Covered Vanderbilt for 7 years in Nashville. And so I've covered. It does help sort of if you want to sell your objectivity on this beat, it makes it easier when you've covered the enemy, the in-state rival. So I've covered both sides of the in-state rivalry in Tennessee, Vanderbilt, and Tennessee. But this is my 4th season covering the Vols. I grew up watching the Vols because I grew up in the state, so I know the history. But I basically came in when Josh Heupel got here. So he and I have sort of been aligned on our timeline.
Okay. You mentioned this. A lot of Tennessee fans think this game should be at Neyland Stadium. How much disappointment is there over that? And what are you hearing about the number of Tennessee fans who are going to descend upon the horseshoe?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of disappointment. I will say, I think there was more of I think there was more of a frustration that Tennessee, from the fan base, that Tennessee should have been ahead of Penn State or Texas, but not necessarily Ohio State. And maybe I'm just speaking for myself here. I thought Ohio State had a better resume than either of those two schools, just from the
Yeah,
quality wins.
I agree with
And
you. I mean,
so, yeah,
I think it was just complete recency bias with Penn State. They look good against Oregon, but if you look at the resumes, I mean, first of all, Ohio State beat them in State College,
right. Yeah,
and
and I mean, Penn State got to the Big Ten championship, but they sort of backed in like
right,
a
they didn't
fifth
play anybody.
tiebreaker,
Yeah,
right? So it wasn't like they earned their way there necessarily. So I think the sense was that maybe Tennessee would get a home game against a Penn State,
yeah.
rather than going to Ohio State or even hosting Ohio State. I never saw the Vols leaping over the Buckeyes, but so there was a disappointment there because it was realistic. Obviously, if you're the 9 seed, you're pretty close to hosting. I mean, the atmosphere at Neyland, number one, is it's an electric atmosphere. It's similar size to the Shoe. It's over 100,000. And here's the thing. Josh Heupel has been almost unbeatable in Neyland Stadium, but he's 4-5 on the road against top 25 teams. So the kryptonite is on the road. He's almost unbeatable at home. So there was a practical sense of you want to be at home because you'll win at home. On the road, not such good chances. Yeah, the ticket thing. If you go anywhere in Knoxville, or even if you get on Vol Twitter, everybody knows somebody who knows 50 people that are going to the game. Like, and if you ask enough people, I know 50 people that go in the game. Well, I know 50 people. You never hear whether or not those people overlap and they're the
yeah,
same
the
people.
same 50.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, the really, really optimistic Tennessee fans think they could get 30,000 people
Wow,
into this game. I think the realistic number would probably be closer to 10,000,
that's still
which
pretty sizable.
I think it's a pretty good accomplishment to get 10%, especially when you get 3,500 tickets, which I think is perfectly fair. I think home field should matter in the playoff. If you earned it, you should keep visiting fans out if you can. But I know a whole lot of people that got in with got the code to
Got
get
the
to the
code.
free
Yeah, I saw
schedule.
that.
I know people that did that. I know people that, fooled some Ohio State season ticket holders to get access to their tickets. I mean, I actually know some of these people. Now, again, do I know the only 50 people or
Yeah.
more? And then, as we record this, you can get online secondary market and still buy tickets for $200. I think it's, to me, from an outsider of Ohio State, it speaks to me of two things. Number one, I feel like there's a hangover over the loss to Michigan, that there's a frustration there.
Right.
But I also wonder if there's a number of Ohio State fans that say, if they lose, I don't want to see it. But if they win, I'm going to save my money for the national title game or the Rose Bowl or whatever, which to me, that's what a fan base would do if they're used to getting into the
Yeah.
playoff and they're
Yeah.
preparing for a long run. Tennessee fans are different, that this may be it. And so, sort of a FOMO thing, fear of missing out. They want to be there just in case they beat Ohio State because it's a game they've waited a long time for.
Let's talk about the team. What were the preseason expectations? I mean, you kind of said this, that getting to the playoff was pretty much the goal.
Yeah, I mean, I thought 10-2. I thought any SEC team 10-2 would get in, and that was sort of the sense around the program. They had Alabama and Georgia on their schedule, and Oklahoma and NC State were ranked in the preseason. So in the preseason, I think they looked at it and said, if you go 2-2 in those 4 games, you're getting in. It turned out different because they beat Alabama, lost to Georgia, as they typically do, and they blew one on the road at Arkansas. By the way, Josh Heupel loses one bad road game every season. Happens every season.
Is that school policy?
It is.
Okay.
Policy is under him. You win almost everything at home, and you blow one on the road every year. And he blew one at Arkansas. But so, they thought if they got to 10-2, they would get in, and they got to 10-2, and they got in. I think the story of, Tennessee, as every SEC team, they all compare themselves to each other. And the story with Tennessee is one of sort of survival. Alabama at times looked better than Tennessee this year. Ole Miss at times looked better than Tennessee. South Carolina at times looked better than Tennessee. But all those teams were sort of ceiling and floor. They were up and down. Tennessee just survived. They had to come back to beat Alabama. They were ugly in a win at Oklahoma. It took them overtime to beat Florida. So a lot of just figuring out a way to win. And after a lot of Tennessee's wins this year, I thought that was a C plus performance, maybe a B minus, but they kept winning them. And some of those other teams that looked better at times just could not figure out how to win enough games. And so, by the way, I think if you tell me Tennessee's going to win this game, I think it's going to be an ugly. They didn't play great, but they figured out how to finish drives or get a play here and there. And I don't think Tennessee wins a game impressively because they haven't done it all year. They win games where it's just good enough.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because Ohio State's been a little bit like that. The Penn State game is probably it's Penn State or Indiana, their signature wins. And Penn State, they fell behind early, had to rally. Indiana was tied 7-7 late in the first half, and then they took control with a couple plays in the punt game. But they haven't been this absolutely powerhouse behemoth that people thought they would be, just
Sure.
blow the doors down. That's just not the way they've been. Like the 2019 team I think about, where they just annihilated everybody. It hasn't been like that. And it's been the offense some weeks, the defense some weeks. The defense has been very good, except for the Oregon game. That's the one game where they just broke down. But the offense has been up and down, as you know, because the offensive line. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
I think maybe this is the case with Ohio State. I sort of compare it to a Georgia because I think there's some similarities there. Elite five-star skill players.
Right.
And for whatever reason, things haven't gone completely according to plan. And I think maybe the issue there with both teams is just not having the depth that was there a few years ago because of NIL and transfer portal that we could talk about forever. But when I see Ohio State from afar, I think maybe there's an identity crisis there a little bit. And I think that's the norm with the elite teams in college football right now, that they're never quite what they should be or what they've been in the past because something is missing that used to be there in terms of depth.
Well, I think with this team, it's really just the offensive line. They lost two of their best players, and the third, Donovan Jackson's moved to left tackle. He's been fine for the most part, but they've gotten missing their new pieces, and they're trying to fit them in. And and this fan base is, as you know, quite what's the right word? They have high expectations. Not very patient.
The offensive line, the injuries there, when you stack them up, the old newspaper way where you put the helmets beside each other and who wins the matchup.
Yep.
Tennessee's defensive line versus Ohio State's offensive line. That's at the end of this. If Tennessee wins, that's the takeaway.
Yep.
Tennessee has the deepest defensive line, I think, in the country. Not the best, but the deepest. They'll play like 12, 13 guys. And they have some NFL guys there, but it's just their depth and the attrition that they can inflict on an offensive line if it does have holes. That's where Tennessee has to be at its very best.
Let's talk about the two losses. The Arkansas game, did that kind of come out of nowhere, or is that just kind of the clunker that Josh Heupel's known to have?
Offense was too stagnant. I think this was the period in the season when Tennessee thought it would be offensively what it has been in the past. Josh Heupel's offenses have always been fast and a lot of points and a lot of yards. And if you don't score in 2 minutes, you're not trying. That's how it's been.
Yeah.
And this year, there's been issues on the offensive line. There was issues with the quarterback, especially early in the year. He's five-star guy, but he's young. There are issues with the wide receivers. It just never came together, and they had to, by late in the season, they had to turn into a running, sometimes clock control, conservative play calling offense. And Josh Heupel said it numerous times this season, he's uncomfortable calling this offense. He's never had one like it, and he's had to bend in ways he's never had to bend before. And you go back to the Arkansas game, and they just couldn't figure out. They kept on trying to score fast and throw the ball down the field and have this electric, dynamic offense they've always had, and it just wasn't there. And they figured out later in the year that they're not going to have that, and I think they adjusted better to it. And again, I'll go back to the fact that every year, Josh Heupel team, It has a clunker on the road, and that was the clunker.
And the other one was Georgia. Obviously, that's a tough game. What happened there?
Yeah, they've lost 8 in a row to Georgia. Kirby Smart is the best big game coach in the country, and they cannot solve that riddle. It's again, I think Ohio State there's some comps there to Georgia in that Tennessee, even when they're running the ball, they love to spread people out. They have the widest splits of any offense in college football. They like to spread people out to get players out of the box. And against most teams, that's an advantage. Against Georgia, that's usually a disadvantage because they put their wide receivers out on islands with 5-star corners that can cover one-on-one. And so you get more one-on-one matchups, and Tennessee usually wins those, and they lose them against Georgia. I think that's something that comes to mind, I think, in the Ohio State matchup. Although I would say with Ohio State, it's probably less corner and more safety. Obviously, I mean, Tennessee cannot match up their wide receivers with those safeties. Maybe the corners they can. But what happened in that game is they were overmatched. Their defense didn't come to play. Defensive line has to dominate for Tennessee to do well this year. That's their strength. And defensive line never could get to Carson Beck. And when they couldn't bring pressure, then that game was over. And it'll be the same one on this one. If they can't bring pressure, then they're not going to win the game.
Okay. You may have already mentioned it when you talked about the offensive line, Ohio State's offensive line against Tennessee's defensive line. But what's the most intriguing thing to you about this game?
The vibes of it. I mean, I've said this a few times this week. I think this is talent versus vibe because to me, well, not to me. I think it's proven Ohio State has the more talented roster. There's no question about that. Now, I know there's issues on the offensive line, but in terms of recruits and key transfers, Ohio State has the better roster. They have more talent. Tennessee's in that neighborhood, but they're not there. I think the vibes on Tennessee's side are better. There's optimism about playing this game. There's a looseness to playing this game. The pressure is not on the coach at all in the way that it is at Ohio State. So I want to know what the score is at the end of the first quarter. And I think that indicates to me who's going to win the game because, not as much this year, but some this year. But throughout Josh Heupel's career, he's been really good at game planning an opening drive, first 15 plays. And, at times they got up on people 14-0, 10-0. I think they've given up. At one point, they didn't give up a touchdown in the first quarter all year. I think that streak was broken maybe in the Georgia game. So Tennessee gets up on people. If Tennessee's up 10-0 on Ohio State in that stadium with sort of the mood that's around that team, I wonder if Ohio State can come back from that. Because I do think the mood would shift dramatically in that stadium if Tennessee were to go up in that way, coming off of the loss to Michigan. If Tennessee is down early, let's say they're down 10-0 at the end of the first quarter, this is not the offense that can come back in the way that Tennessee has the past few years. Again, this used to be an offense that put 50 on anybody, and it's just not. It doesn't have that juice this year. So I think the first quarter of this game is going to be really, really important to both sides.
Interesting. Let's kind of go through the roster a little bit. Let's start with the quarterback, Nico Iamaleava. Is that how you pronounce it?
Iamaleava.
Oh my God, I wasn't even close. I shouldn't even tried.
He is Prince or Madonna here. It's one word. It's Nico. Everybody calls him Nico here.
Say it again.
Iamaleava.
Iamaleava.
Yeah.
It flows nicely.
It's close. I say it fast because if you say it fast, it's correct.
It's almost like Rabinowitz, just rolls off the tongue.
That's right. Nico.
Yeah.
Nico is a 5-star talent. Him and Arch Manning came in as the number 1 and number 2 quarterbacks of their class 2 years ago. He's got some mobility, but not a lot. He's got a slingshot for an arm. He's very accurate to the sidelines. But the win or the loss to him this year is whether or not he can utilize the middle of the field. In games where he's utilized the middle of the field, they've been really good in the pass game. When he hasn't done that, they have struggled. He has struggled. And so again, I think that's where the safeties come into this game because I don't like the matchup of the passing game against the safeties. But Nico is ascending. I mean, there was a preseason thought that he may have he had some Heisman hype. I think we've learned throughout the year he's still a redshirt freshman. He's going to have to play one of his best games in this one. There's a fine line with him between pressing too much, but also you need some dynamic plays from
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
Pass rush when it's gotten to him this year, he has not responded to it well. He's gotten rattled quite a bit.
Okay. Dylan Sampson is the bell cow. I mean, he carries but he's the guy on offense, at least in terms of the run game. I know he's like 5'10", 5'11". He's not a big guy. He's kind of compact at least, but breaks a lot of tackles. I watched the highlight thing of him on YouTube, and very shifty, very good with the first cut, right? Between the tackles especially. Is that what makes him special?
Yeah, he's good after contact. Very instinctive runner. Does not take losses. Usually gets a gain anytime he touches it, even if he's hitting the backfield. But the one knock on him is that he has had fumbleitis this year early in games. He's fumbled. I think he fumbled like 4 games in a row. Yeah, most of them in the red zone early in the game.
Mm.
I mean, the talk around Knoxville is he's the best player on the team, but he cannot have an early fumble because everybody now expects him to rush for 160 but have one bad fumble. And Ohio State, I'm sure the first thing that they were told when they turned on the film is this guy's a phenomenal running back. He's as good as anybody on this team. He's the SEC Player of the Year. But if he gets locked up, grab the ball because he'll give it up. And that could be a big difference in this game if your best player is making a mistake like that.
Right. Well, the Oregon game turned for Ohio State when John Judkins lost a fumble. It wasn't really his fault. The ball got just ripped out of his hands as he was, in the pile. But yeah, I mean those are game-changing plays, no question.
Dylan Sampson tries too hard sometimes. He will fight to get a yard and lose the ball.
Okay. You mentioned the offensive line. I know Cooper Mays, I think, is the center, right?
Yep.
Terrific player. Remington finalist, obviously. Seth McLaughlin won it. How's the line overall? How good a line is it overall?
There are holes in it for sure. The interior is pretty good. Cooper Mays is really good. One of the best centers in the country. He kind of runs the offense. He's been there 5-6 years. He knows Heupel's offense better than anybody on the team. And he's had different quarterbacks to run it through. He's very good, very sound, very consistent. He's not going to make a major mistake. He's just not. He never does. The guards are solid. There's an all SEC guard in there. The enormous question all season and in this game are the tackles. Both tackles, John Campbell, Miami transfer on the right, Lance Hurd, LSU transfer on the left. There's a 5-star guy coming out of high school, but he's still young. They have gotten better, but they've also had a lot of breakdowns in pass coverage or in pass protection this year, and they commit way too many penalties. Way too many penalties. Holding, false start, you name it, they commit it, and it's been an issue all season. Tennessee's one of the most penalized teams in the country. They are every year with Josh Heupel. Usually it's because the tempo they go. This year it's because their tackles have committed a lot of penalties. If Ohio State gets a number of sacks, it's going to be coming off the edge.
Okay. And that's their strength, Ohio State's pass rush. Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau. I mean, that's their strength.
And the thing is, Tennessee is at its best when it likes to go 2 tight ends.
Yeah.
But the problem is they want to throw to the tight ends. If they're against a good pass rush, they will keep the tight ends in for mass protect, and then they sort of lose that element of their offense. Yeah. Sort of cut off their nose to spite their face,
right.
Because they have to guard against those tackles getting beat on the outside.
Right. Again, we're being joined by Adam Sparks of the Knoxville News-Sentinel. Got it right this time, didn't I? News-Sentinel.
You did, yeah.
The wide receivers, they got a bunch of guys who have in the 20s and 30 catches. No, I mean, certainly not the level of Ohio State's receivers, right?
No, they had a Biletnikoff winner 2 years ago. They've had all SEC guys. This year, there's not a number one. There's a lot of 2s and 3s and 4s. So there's not a guy that Ohio State is going to turn on the film and say, we got to know where that guy is. It's more of they pick up yards in the offense, in the passing offense, by scheme open. And Nico has been really accurate at times. But Dante Thornton is statistically, he's their best. He's had really good games, and then he's disappeared in other games. Brew McCoy is their former five-star USC transfer. He's their most seasoned guy. He'll catch the ball and run over somebody, but he's not going to beat you deep. They've just, they've got a handful of guys. The thing is, their last game against Vanderbilt, all three starters were knocked out of that game by injury. Now, as we talk right now, I think all three will be back, but I would say one or two of them won't be anywhere close to 100%. Squirrel White, their slot receiver, has left, I think, like 4 games in a row with a shoulder injury. Their best guy after that is a five-star freshman, Mike Matthews, which this may be a coming out game for him. I don't know. He's a phenomenal talent, but he's played very little. Tennessee lost 4 wide receivers in the portal, so they're
this week. You mean?
Yes. Yeah.
This week.
Yes. Yeah.
They lost 4.
They lost 4. They lost 2 guys that were not going to play in this game,
okay.
And except maybe special teams, and they lost 2 rotational guys, like I guess it'd be their 5th and 6th receivers. Rotational depth guys that can play some. One of them would start if Squirrel White, the slot receiver, was out, but he's not going to start now because he's in the transfer portal. So,
yeah. Well, so none of those guys are. A couple of Ohio State guys in the portal are going to stay with the team throughout the playoffs.
Yeah, Josh Heupel said none of these guys. They're gone and they're not coming back. So, Tennessee's lost, I think, 9 guys. One running back that would maybe play a little bit in this game is in the portal. Their biggest loss, and we'll get to defense in a minute, but their biggest loss is a rotational linebacker who they would need in coverage and pass coverage, third down. He's in the portal, so that's another guy that's gone.
Okay,
it's a strange time.
I know. We expect this for meaningless bowl games, right? But not a playoff.
Yeah.
Let's shift to the defense and the defensive line. James Pierce Jr. But he's the headliner. 7.5 sacks, first round pick looks like. What makes him special?
He's as quick as any guy I've seen off the edge. And he'll get an offsides penalty this game. He gets one a lot. He times the snap.
Tennessee's got some odd rules.
That's right. Yeah. They don't mind getting some penalties, and if he jumps early 4 times and they call it once, it's a net positive.
Okay.
He's extremely quick off the edge. They've got 2 or 3 guys like that off the edge. A guy that I would pay attention to is Omar Norman Lott. If you look at the stats, he's not their first or second or maybe even third defensive tackle. But he is a playmaker. He's going to be a high draft pick because he's a interior pass rusher, and those don't grow on trees. So, but it's more of it's sort of James Pierce and everybody else. But I would put Pierce with the rest of them. Like I said, 11, 12, maybe even 13 guys will rotate on the defensive line, and it'll be like hockey. They'll have a shift of 4, be out there for 2 plays, and then bring in a new 4, and then bring in a new 4 after that.
I wonder if Ohio State will go tempo and keep the same 11 guys in the field to prevent that from happening.
I mean, that's what Tennessee has done on offense for years. They've gone tempo, no huddle, and so there's no subs. Tennessee actually has had some controversy this year because they've tried to exploit the rule of subbing. You get so much time to sub, and so their guys will have the slowest jog you have ever seen to get off the field. That was a penalty on them in the Georgia game, which made it as a controversial thing.
Okay,
12 men on the field, but yeah, that's what I would do against Tennessee. Is I would go tempo. But the problem is, if you go tempo, you could leave yourself open to that pass rush if you're not organized enough.
Right.
So,
or not even go tempo, just don't sub.
Right.
You don't have to go tempo. Right.
Yeah.
Just keep the same 11 guys on the field.
Yeah.
The back 7 not as strong as the front 4, right?
That's correct. Yeah. Jermod McCoy, all SEC corner. He's an Oregon State transfer. He's really good. He would play at Ohio State in that secondary. He would start for Ohio State. The rest is they've improved on in the secondary from last season, but their safety's a walk-on. Will Brooks. He's still a walk-on right now. He's not on scholarship,
Hmm.
but he's had two or three big picks for him this year against Alabama, NC State. So they're sort of pieced together. Andre Turrentine, another
Yes.
starting safety,
Familiar name.
Ohio State transfer. Um, so guys like that, a walk-on, an Oregon State transfer, an Ohio State transfer, they've kind of pieced together their secondary. They're solid in the secondary. Where they've been exploited in the back seven, or really back six, is their linebackers in coverage, especially in the middle of the field. And I mentioned to you one of their guys are gone. It's one of their better coverage linebackers. Their linebackers, really for the past couple 3 years, have been beat a lot by tight ends and by backs over the middle. They're sluggish on getting into coverage, and they can, to use a coaching phrase, they can get fooled by a lot of eye candy and a lot of motion,
Mhm.
and you'll see those linebackers trailing guys over the middle a lot. That's another one of their kryptonites. That if you throw to the middle where a linebacker is supposed to be in coverage, you're probably going to beat him.
So crossing patterns, even with the
Yep.
receivers, or they use Travion Henderson sometimes that way. They can be exploited there.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. How's the kicker? Because hey, maybe that was the difference in the game for Ohio State against Michigan.
Kicker is young. He missed like four or five in a row at one point this year, but then the rest of the year he's been money. So we'll see. Overall, he's really good. He had one slump, but he can make a 52, 53 yarder.
Okay.
He's pretty good. And their punter is an Aussie punter.
Aren't they all anymore? Almost.
They are, and I guess not all of them are like this, but some are. But he kicks with either foot. So
Okay. All right.
he will roll right and punt with his right. He'll roll left and punt with his left.
Switch kicker.
He's switch kicker, yeah, and he's very good with either. We're still
Okay.
waiting on him to fake one. They have not faked a punt yet, but he's an Australian rules football
Sure.
player. He's a really good athlete and a really good runner. Maybe this will be the game we finally see
Okay.
the fake punt.
Um, you've seen the forecast, I'm sure. It's supposed to be, the high in the mid to upper 20s, but by the time it gets dark, it'll probably be in the teens. Tennessee's, Knoxville's not the deep South. People may have a misconception. I mean, Tennessee is the mid South. But how much do you think that will play a role?
It could play some. There was sort of a viral Twitter video out there a few games ago of Tennessee players sitting on a heated bench in a game where it was like 53 degrees or something. So,
Okay.
so there's a few guys I know that prefer it be warmer. Now, if you ask Josh Heupel, which we have, he's from South Dakota. He wears shorts to practice in December.
Yeah.
We asked him, and he said this is June in South Dakota when it's 20
Yeah.
degrees.
Right.
You know,
Right.
yeah. I
But
mean,
he's not playing.
that's right. That's right. I mean, the biggest question is the quarterback is Nico because he's a Southern
Right.
California guy
Long Beach, right?
from Long Beach. They played a game against Vanderbilt in the regular season finale, and it was in the mid 30s. And he was bundled up pretty well, but he played one of his better games. So it could be a factor. I don't think it'll be a huge factor. I've checked my weather app every morning since this matchup was done. I check Columbus and I check Knoxville, and Columbus is usually 5 or 6 degrees cooler, and the wind chill a little bit more than that. So they're not going from Miami to Columbus. They're going from
Right.
the Smoky Mountains to Columbus. So they'll be okay, I think.
Okay. Adam, is there anything else about this matchup that you would like to talk about?
No, I mean, I've kind of mentioned this before, but I'm just really interested in the Ohio State mood, and because the sense here is that there's a lot of tension around the Ohio State program. Now, the thing is, I think a lot of that is taken from Twitter and from fans.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
you know, are the fans tight or is the team tight? Because the fans being tight or frustrated makes no difference if the
Right.
team's not.
Right.
And so that's a lot of my question. A lot of Tennessee fans have taken solace in the fact that they may be going up against a team that, is just not happy right now and is not super confident. And I feel like that's probably more the fan base and not necessarily the players.
Well, I think they're not happy. The confidence is a different matter. I think it's a confident team still because they know what they are. I mean, they know what they should be at least. This is a team that even if they have to win an extra game, feels fully confident they could win a national championship. Now, the offensive line makes that more of a challenge, but I don't think it changes the goal. I think that they believe, I mean, look, you look at their roster, they're going to have, 10 to 15 guys drafted this year. And so you go, okay, there's no reason they can't win it. I mean, they lost to Oregon by 1 point on the road, very tough environment, and a game they didn't play particularly well and had some breaks go against them. If Will Howard takes a knee a second earlier, maybe they kick a field goal. Or maybe they missed a field goal. but I mean, they're right there. There's nobody, and I watched Georgia enough, a couple games to think, I thought they were the team that Ohio State, that's a tough one. Georgia's not, at least they're a little bit like Ohio State. They haven't played to their potential either.
Right.
And so there's no team out there that Ohio State looks at and goes, well, we have a hard time beating them. And Michigan's not in the playoff, so it's not an issue.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception about Ohio State that people are taking from the Michigan game. I know there's sort of a hex there that does not exist against another opponent.
Right.
So, I understand there can be some tightness when Ohio State plays Michigan. There's not that extra stuff around any other team, especially just a random SEC team that they happen to be matched up in the playoff. Yeah. So some Tennessee fans saw the Ohio State-Michigan game and thought that's the opponent that they're going to get. And I don't think that's accurate. So
we're going to find out. We're going to find out.
Well, we'll see. But that's what I'm curious about. I think the biggest storyline is with Ohio State, regardless of how this goes, because either Ohio State's going to bounce back and you're going to say, hey, they go to the Rose Bowl and beat Oregon and they're the favorite to win the national title. Or if they lose, the story nationally is not that Tennessee won, it's that Ryan Day and Ohio State lost. I think that's the narrative of this game.
Right. Well, Adam, I appreciate you joining me for this podcast so much. Adam Sparks from the Knoxville News-Sentinel. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yep. Good to be on.
Be sure and subscribe to the Buckeye Extra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.